Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we are diving into a topic that has been on my mind as we head into the US elections. International politics, sanctions, and how global power plays affects us all, especially in Africa. On one side of the US election, we have Donald Trump, a controversial figure who stirred up unrest after his previous loss. On the other, we have Kamala Harris, who could become the first black woman president of the United States. But this election isn't about who wins. It's about the impact that victory might have globally. The United States has imposed sanctions on several African countries over the years, Zimbabwe, Sudan, and more, often for human rights violations and undemocratic practices. These sanctions claim to target corrupt leaders, but in reality, they affect the people most.
The US says its sanctions against Zimbabwe target specific government officials and entities it accuses of undermining democratic institutions or processes. But Zimbabwe's current president says the sanctions have devastated his country's economy, imposing a huge burden on ordinary people.
My country's citizens have fallen victim to this indiscriminate weapon of mass destruction.
So what happens if Trump wins in 2024, but this time under controversial circumstances? Let's not forget he's facing serious legal challenges right now.
USA! USA!
1 year ago today, Trump supporters from across the country gathered in the nation's capital to protest Congress's certification of the 2020 presidential election results.
To use a favorite term that all of you people really came up with, we will stop the steal.
In August 2023, Trump was indicted in the federal election interference case, accused of trying to overturn the results of the 2020 elections and obstruct the certification of electoral votes. Prosecutors argue that Trump's actions, including false claims of election fraud and pressuring officials, were a direct attack on American democracy. The original indictment charged Trump with conspiracy to defraud the US government, obstructing an official proceeding, and conspiracy to violate voting rights. And although Trump wasn't directly charged with inciting the violence on January 6, prosecutors argue that he exploited it to try to subvert Joe Biden's victory.
A group of his supporters on the western side of the Capitol confront the handful of police guarding the barriers and force their way through.
This case has already been delayed. Originally scheduled for March 2024, it's now postponed as Trump appeals his immunity claims. The Supreme Court ruled in July 2024 that Trump had absolute immunity from prosecution for actions taken while in office. But there are still other actions that could lead to prosecution. And with these legal battles ongoing, it begs the question, what if he wins the presidency again?
The Office of Foreign Assets Control under the US Department of Treasury is responsible for administering sanctions.
The US has a history of imposing sanctions on other countries claiming to defend democracy and human rights. But what happens if Trump, a leader accused of undermining those very principles, comes back in power under questionable circumstances? Who will impose sanctions on the US? The US has sanctioned African leaders for far less. But what happens when it's America itself that violates democratic norms? Who holds them accountable? Now what if the Democrats win instead? Kamala Harris becoming the first black woman president could bring significant changes to US foreign policy. Could we see a shift in how the US approaches sanctions, particularly against Africa? Recently, many US sanctions against African leaders have been linked to issues like land ownership reforms and LGBT rights. These are topics that often clash with deeply held cultural values in African communities. Another issue where Kamala Harris's policies stand in stark contrast to most of Africa is abortion. Kamala Harris has been a vocal advocate of abortion rights in the US. She supports passing a federal law to protect these rights, following the overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022. In contrast, most African countries have strict anti-abortion laws rooted in cultural and religious beliefs. In these places, abortion is often illegal or highly restricted, and Harris's stance on this issue might be seen as controversial. This divergence is crucial. Where Kamala Harris promotes progressive values that align with Western liberal ideals, many African nations see these policies as an affront to their cultural and religious norms. Whether it's LGBT rights or abortion, African leaders and communities tend to resist Western pressures to adopt these views. Could this create tension between US and Africa if Harris wins? Will sanctions increase if African countries refuse to follow suit? While Trump's legal battles continue, the world watches. Special Counsel Jack Smith has revised the indictment to comply with the Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity, but Trump still faces serious charges for conspiring to overturn the 2020 elections. His defense argues that he believed the elections were rigged, despite his advisors telling him otherwise.
I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side.
In the end, whether it's Trump or Harris, the outcome of the 2024 elections could reshape global relationships. African nations have been on the receiving end of US sanctions for decades, but in the face of America's own democratic struggles, what will happen next? So here's what I want to know from you. Do you think the sanctions on African countries are justified, especially when they hurt the citizens more than the leaders? And if Trump becomes president under dubious circumstances, who will hold the US accountable? What about Kamala Harris's policies? Could they create new tensions, particularly on issues like abortion and LGBT rights? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Should sanctions be rethought? Do they really serve their purpose? Thanks for watching. And if you found this discussion thought-provoking, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.